Question I had was I use Studio One and I do my mixing there, and then when I'm ready to um, sort of export to like an MP3 file or something like that, Studio One has like this project page. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Studio One or not, but it's like where you would do mastering and
Hmm.
do the final output.
Hmm.
So recently I had done a couple of songs, and they're very simple, just usually just guitar and vocals. And one of the songs, we're tracking the same way, mixing very similarly. One of the songs was quieter than the other one, and in the mix, the two mixes sounded fine. But when I went into the project page and the mastering thing and exported the MP3, one of the songs became elevated in volume on the output and wasn't matching, kind of with the other one.
Hmm.
And I couldn't figure out how to get it quieter. I mean, I had the levels were lower. The true peak um, on one song was, at probably about minus zero point 0.5, and on the other one was like minus 9 or something like that. That was the one that was supposed to be quieter. But when I did the output, the volume came up on it, so they weren't really matched in volume, and I could not, for the life of me, figure out how to get the one that was louder quieter.
Hmm.
Any thoughts about what might be happening there?
Um, I don't know, Kyle. If anything's coming to mind,
Loudness is one of these things that has a few different variables. I mean, we've got what we hear and what sounds louder, and then we've got a lot of different metrics that help us represent that objectively, when it's ultimately a subjective experience, loudness, right? So I think I'm not an expert. I've talked to Jonathan Weiner a little bit about this. I've watched his videos. If you're interested in learning about loudness, maybe check out Isotope's "Are You Listening" series with Jonathan Weiner in it. But my understanding, Gabe, is that it's very important when comparing LUFS measurements that you also consider the difference in true peak, right?
yeah, right.
And could you maybe help, even like I'm not even sure I can confidently talk on that without misleading people, because I'm still learning this myself.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a complicated subject that jumping right in the middle of without a lot of background is difficult. Uh, you know, I, we're kind of making some assumptions that we understand what LUFS metering is, and we understand what true peak is, and that's maybe a good place to start if you're not familiar with it. Um, but yeah, I mean, you when ultimately what's important is that we have there's perceived loudness and there's measured loudness. A thing can be loud without feeling loud, and a thing can feel loud without being loud. And there's a difference. And the problems that we have are that the numbers that we use to represent loudness don't always match our perception of what is loud. And that's where true peak is different than LUFS is. Um, LUFS is a measurement of volume over time, but it's measuring specific frequencies in program material over time, and it's really devised to be more focused on dialogue. That was its intent in its inception, was to help uh, television and broadcast stations have consistency in what the level of the vocal or the dialogue is between commercials and program materials, and it's a result of an act. It's been around long before the act of Congress passed, but there was an act of Congress that basically said you can't if you're broadcasting cable television, you can't have one commercial be really really loud and the program is really really quiet. It was driving people crazy, so they made it a law that you have to conform to this. So there's a lot of standards in LUFS that are around dialogue. When we apply that to music, there's instruments that can be in the range of human voice, but then there's musical instruments that can be outside the range of human voice that are the focus of the mix at any given moment in time. So your LUFS levels, if they don't sound like a typical song, can be somewhat misleading, in that they're really looking at the harmonics that are in the mid-range frequencies where speech is. True peak is dealing with like, how loud we're getting, in measurement. Like what are the actual, on our meter, how loud is the loudest sound that we're getting, in over a period of time. And it's not generally averaged. It's just what the true peaks are. It's what the loudest thing is. And when we create loudness over time, that's the real trick here. It's if you're momentarily measuring loudness, you're going to get one static measurement, and it's not going to tell the story of, it's the difference of a story over 1,000 years versus a story of a week versus a story of what happened since breakfast. And in those time spans, different things can happen, but we may feel collectively the same feelings, right? So this is where a dial norm is designed to help broadcast stations look at a very long period of time and can ensure consistency. Whereas short-term changes, that's really not going to be told in the LUFS value by itself. So we incorporate a true peak component to that says peak to peak. What is the range of average level to the loudest level? And then what is the quietest thing? And that creates a range. And that sort of tells a more complete story. And you kind of have to be able to put those two together. The thing that I think you might want to do, and I'm going to go back to what I was talking about with Ed, is do some reference listening. And rather than relying on what things sound like based on the numbers, listen, pull in some stuff that's already been mixed to the level that you want it to be, and switch back and forth. I think that metric AB that's a good example of how I would use that plugin in another way, right? Is to say, is my stuff as loud as the thing that I'm trying to, match on the commercial scene? And you'll hear right away when you switch back and forth the delta in level. And that gives you there you're using your ear to tell what do I perceive the volume to be.
Right.
I've had people submit mixes that they swear to God are loud, smashing mixes, and when we put them on the speakers, it sounds kind of quiet and weak. It's because they've overcompressed everything, because things are just so loud all the time that they just kind of feel, I don't know, like confined. And that's because the true peak, or not the true peak, but the peak to peak values have shrunk. And so we perceive that as less loud, even though the levels are as loud as, this track that came out last week on the radio and is on track to win a Grammy. This one feels different than this one does, even though the numbers match.
Right.
So they tell some part of the story, but they don't tell the whole story. These LUFS and true peak numbers, you have to put them within context, and that's where that comparative listening is really critical to giving yourself a chance to figure out like what part of this is off and what part of it's on.
Well, the problem I was having was that if I just listened to the two mixes of the two songs, they sounded fine. They were kind of like at the right level. Then when I put them into the mastering program to just raise the level of both of them, the one of them, was fine raised up, but the other one just was too loud, and I couldn't figure out how to quiet it down. And I was, looking at the statistics to try to figure out what was wrong, what might possibly be the situation. So, for example, I was looking at RMS as well, and on the one song that sounded fine, the RMS was at like minus 17.4, and the other one was at minus 16.5. So I thought, well, maybe I could just use like a mix tool to lower the gain a little bit and get the RMS levels closer to match, but that didn't work either. I couldn't get the one song to be quieter. Normally, when you're mastering, you're trying to make everything kind of louder. I was trying to make it quieter, and I couldn't make it quieter.
Well, what you said that raises my like dog whistle for me is the fact that you're using mastering software.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like I'm sure this maybe isn't what it is, but it's what it sounds like when I hear that term. My reaction to it is like, here's a black box that no one really understands how it works, and you're putting stuff in and you're getting stuff out, and it's supposed to be better, but why isn't it better? It sounds like what you're dealing with there is possibly a maximizer is being utilized, and somewhere along the way, and that's where like you're pulling down the threshold, and it's actually making things louder the more you do that, and then you have to pull down the max peak a little bit too. What can happen is that quiet things, because the threshold gets pulled down so far, also become louder. The makeup gain is built into the pull down algorithm, which is different than a compressor, right? Which just pulls things down. So you may be having a situation where the software is trying to apply a maximizer to the signal, and that's making it just louder in general. But it's a black box. I mean, I kind of feel like a Click and Clack on NPR, like the Tappet brothers, who used to have that call-in mechanic show. People call in with their car problems and say like, hey, my catalytic converter is my car is making a clack 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 sound, and they'd ask a bunch of questions, and eventually they'd figure out what the problem is, and they say, oh yeah, go talk to your mechanic. It's got to be this. I without seeing what's going on, it's really hard for me to give you, I think, effective advice on what to do differently. But I can say that it sounds to me like there's something in there that is pulling things down and making it louder at the same time under the guise of mastering, which is not outside of what I think is reasonable. In what I've seen from mastering softwares that are just like, yeah, this is a mastering thing. We master here. That's not what mastering actually is. But when we try to make one button solve everything, sometimes the collateral damage can be there are tracks that just that machine just can't figure out in an intuitive way, the way we might if we had discrete controls at our disposal. So all I can do is say, like, get in there and figure out how it's working and what are the things being applied, and then systematically, whoa, that was weird.
Yeah.
Systematically start taking those things out of the chain until you don't have that problem anymore.
Yeah, there is.
When you find that
there is a maximizer in there too, and I think I will take it out and see if that.
Yeah, it smells like a maximizer problem to me, but I would, without being there to know for sure, I can't say. I don't want to armchair quarterback this one, but it's worth poking around in and seeing if there's something in that maximizer bit that might help. And comparative listening before and after it's good to know that what's changing.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I think there's another element in addition to loudness, which is like impact, right?
Yeah.
And how something that has different or a lesser loudness specification or a lesser loudness reading could have more impact, or vice versa, right? And they're like not necessarily one-to-one. I just watched a video by White Sea Audio, I think is what the channel's called, and he was talking about loudness and how the platforms such as Spotify and Apple Music, they're going to try to normalize the listening experience for the listener anyway, meaning that ideally the listener would hear consistent loudness from song to song, even if they're listening to things from different artists and different, even if those raw files were radically different loudness, right? But out of that, I gained that most professional engineers would aim to have a true peak that nearly utilizes the entire dynamic range, meaning that putting up a file that's -9 true peak, you're kind of just wasting 8 dB of headroom that you could use. You want to be at least, I think, -1 or -2 so that the codec doesn't cause distortion, right? You don't want to completely go to -0.0001 dB full scale. So, but if you leave like 1 dB of true peak, now if both songs are there, you can more accurately compare the integrated loudness, right? Which again, it takes into consideration the whole song. I think it also disregards really, really quiet parts or something like that. But I've seen situations in my own video production, which if I'm doing a music demonstration, I don't shoot for the same loudness as my voice throughout the entire thing because it's dynamically much different, right? Yeah. But I think my point is kind of, maybe even Streamliner is a good tool for this. If it sounds good to you, Rich, and you're kind of utilizing the full dynamic range in terms of true peak, maybe the platform will help line things up in terms of the loudness experience for the listener. Is that true, Gabe? Like, what do you target, in general in these readings, or do you kind of just use your ear, make sure you're utilizing the dynamic range and make sure it sounds good to your ear, and then let the platform do what it will?
Yeah. When you're mastering, generally they're telling me what the output's going to be. So I'll do sometimes I'm asked to do an Apple Music master, and in addition to a CD master. Sometimes I'm asked to do a separate one for YouTube, because they have different targets. The mixes don't sound different; they just sound a little bit quieter or a little bit louder. They're the same mixes, so it's not there's not that much going on. But in the YouTube one tends to put mid-range forward a little more, so you do have to kind of be a little careful about that. I'm in all cases I'm never using MP3s, so that with MP3s you have a lot of compression. Like that's a lossy format where you really lose a lot of data, and I don't generally trust MP3s. I don't. I sometimes they're useful for like getting artists to proof a mix or something quickly over the internet, but they don't sound great. And I almost wonder if maybe because you're mixing so quiet into an MP3, if maybe for some reason that algorithm's just making it louder so that when it encodes, it doesn't lose the dynamic range or goes to a smaller bit depth because it's somehow adaptive bit resolution. I mean, there's so many variables there that could potentially be a part of that problem. But to your question, Kyle, yeah, you can't do one to make everything work. But if you get kind of in the ballpark, then the streaming platforms will get everything else. It'll kind of homogenize everything in more or less the same way. And I generally find that the quality of the mixes, if they're generally well done, that it's a minimal change, though you can hear a shift in the quality of the sounds.
That was a good question, by the way, Rich. And I think I've been thinking a long time, how do I make a video? First, I'm going to need to get people who are experts in this, who know way more than I do. So that's step one. And then it's also just really difficult for those experts to explain it in a really succinct way because it's so complicated. So then we're really going to have to scaffold out the lesson. Yeah. So I've been working on this for years, but it's just a tough thing. So don't feel like you're alone if it's confusing you, because I think it's confusing a lot of people.